I'm happy to see at least some people going out of the sun. My name is Ib Bondebjerg, and I'm going to talk about transnational European television drama, realities, challenges, and visions this morning. And the first part of the presentation is a presentation of the research project, which was, in fact, the background for this presentation. It's a research project called Mediating Cultural Encounters Through European Screens that ran from 2013 to 2016. And I would like to point to the fact that there is still a very live website that you can access at this address, www.mercedes.co.uk. There's a lot of material there from the process, and you can find interesting stuff. To the right you find the book, which I was the lead author of. It's a co-authored book by one of the teams from Copenhagen. And if you are really interested, I managed to get Palgrave to give 20% discount if you book it online. So, that was the advertisement. Let's look a little at the research project. It was organized by teams, 3 teams. Team 1 was a film team based at York University in the United Kingdom and focused on the study of film, co-production and distribution across Europe. There's going to be a book published from this group next year, I think. Team 2 was about digitalization and media policy, and it was a team placed in Brussels, in Belgium, focusing on the digital development and EU and national media policies and the challenges from the new streaming services. Also here a book will appear. Team 3 is what I'm going to talk about today, the Copenhagen Team, which was a television team looking at television across Europe from different angles. And the book, as you know, is already out. Just briefly to mention this, there was also an advisory board representing 8 European countries, and we had a number of associate partners from the European think tank for film and film policy, the Danish Film Institute, etc., etc. So it's a project that tried to build a bridge between academia and the world of television and film business. Now, what were the main research questions? It was first of all, we wanted to look at what were the main forces and dynamics behind transnational European co-production and distribution. Why did it work if it worked, and why didn't it work if it didn't work? And what kind of transnational networks were being developed, and what influence could that have on the overall development? Secondly, is unity in diversity a fruitful way of describing the European film and television culture, and how can we use the national and regional diversity creatively and at the same time overcome the obvious fragmentation and weakness of a common European film and television culture? Following that, how does the global and digital development influence and challenge national film and television cultures in Europe, and how can national and European policies interact to meet those challenges? What can we do in Europe to meet this challenge? Last but not least, audiences, cultural encounters. The concept of cultural encounters covers both the kind of cultural encounters that took place through networks, through the creative collaboration and making of a television series across borders. And it also covers the audience aspects. How do they react to stories from different countries? And what is the role of television and film narratives in shaping our perception and understanding of our own national culture and the culture of others? And this was certainly one of the key issues in the project, to study audiences, to actually see what happened when they met foreign products. And it was a very positive experience, I will say, because generally it went down very well, and we have been analyzing some interesting cases. So we did work with cases as well, genres. We studied crime, we studied contemporary drama and historical drama, and we asked ourselves, what are the universal dimensions of those genres? What are the national and what are the European dimensions, if any? So one of the things we wanted to do was to study both the structural development over a longer period and dive into general or more specific case studies. So we have what we call the structural analysis. So we have data in this project on television drama in selected countries from 2005 until today, with a lot of different data dimensions that we could work with. We have data on co-production networks in 12 countries and 72 stations from 2011 to 2014. And we have data on drama by national origin in 13 European countries between 2006 and 2013. You will get a gist of what we found there. And then we have data on the genres we worked with in the same period. So what happened between 2005 and today, 2016, where we ended, with the genres. Which genre traveled best? And how did they travel, etc., etc. And to go into the more audience-oriented aspects, we also made surveys on national attitudes and preferences for television drama in several countries. So the case studies then were in-depth studies of selected drama productions in the three genres. It was also a study of how they were made, the creative work behind it, and the way it was distributed. And we made focus groups for cases from several European countries, and we made quantitative, and sorry, I forgot to we made studies of analysis of reception in at least 3 countries, where we also took in what newspapers and social media said. Now, this is a kind of conclusion very early on, but I'm going to build on it later on. Because the focus points of this presentation and what we found out could be spelled out in these 5 main points. First of all, European film and television culture is still a very fragmented and nationally divided culture. That's not a surprise. There's much more diversity than unity, but the creative transnational networks are on the rise and create a much, much stronger backbone for co-production and distribution, and actually reaching audiences in other countries. There's also, historically, if you look at the development, a slight increase in European content on European channels since 2005. And this is a consequence of changes in the way European television stations buy, or rather do not buy, American content, package content. So there has been a shift here, but this development is now challenged by structural digital challenges, because Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime bring back the American dominance in Europe. There's a rise in both small and big European country distribution of television drama abroad. But though this distribution is increasing to many more channels and many more regions in Europe, what happens is in most cases, that drama with a national mass audience at home are generally reduced to niche audiences and channels abroad. So, for instance, if we talk about the much hyped Nordic noir, well, it is there. It is certainly important, but don't mistake quantity for quality. It's not a quantitatively strong trend by any means. Now, what we also found is that audiences around Europe seem to be open to other European drama products than the dominant US-UK products they are used to. So, just as new networks create European new television culture, the mediated cultural encounters seem to be able to change the habits into a greater sort of transnational European understanding. Again, I will show some examples of that later on. But last but not least, the biggest structural challenge at present is the attack and undermining of PSB television in Europe, and also the fragmentation of audiences on new digital platforms. So just as it's beginning to look a little brighter, this comes in, and it is certainly going to be one of the biggest challenges. Now, the question of cultural integration and cultural encounters, which is central to our project, tells us something about the power of creative networks in Europe. But we started out discussing what kinds of ways of looking upon, should we say, European culture, European identity, can we see? And the first one we saw is one we called cultural essentialism, which basically says that, come on guys, we have a common European culture. It's out there, we share it all, but we just have to reinvent it in a modern version, and then, bingo, we will have a European culture. I'm not quoting Jérôme Clément to mock him, but this is an example of what I think. To change, he was the first president of Arte, one of the very good and interesting transnational European channels. He said, to change mentalities, frame of mind, and to create the conditions of a veritable united Europe, it isn't enough to have a currency, an army corps, and legal directives. What is necessary is a common imagination. To think Europe together, so that Germans, French, Italians, Spanish, and all others, even the English, learn to look at the world and to think the world together. Well, it's probably a nice vision, but it is in many ways an illusion in reality, because that's not the way it's going on in Europe, I think, or we think. So what we set to ourselves is that we have to have a functional, pragmatic view on cultural integration. Maybe nicely put in unity in diversity, which is the official slogan now of the European Union. But what is important is not to have big visions and ideas, although that can also be nice. It is to create institutional frameworks for transnational support of culture, of audiovisual industries, as it had happened since the 1980s through the European media programs. And, of course, also at national and transnational levels. So this functional pragmatism is really what is working. If you look at what's going on in the European film and television industry, this is where all the good creative forces are joined together and create frameworks that actually make some kind of transnational European collaboration. And then, of course, we think that mediated cultural encounters, both through the creative professionals, producers, buyers, distributors, writers, directors, etc., that is the most important, but next to that, audiences that actually continue experiencing and meeting other non-national programs. So if we look at the importance of this, then co-production and funding schemes of a transnational nature has been on the rise all over Europe. Most recently with the N12 initiative in Scandinavia, which was mentioned yesterday. And this has increased non-national and non-US UK content. And I say non-US UK content because UK is the America of Europe when it comes to television. It has created more and more established creative professional networks in Europe, and we have a quotation here from Kuipers, a Dutch researcher who made a study of 4 European countries in 2010 and 11, and talked about this in this way. Transnational cultural trade implies creation of transnational standards, professional habitus and organizational forms as well as economic value. National and transnational fields increasingly intersect. National fields maintain their own dynamics and relative autonomy even when incorporated into a transnational arena. And I think the last part of that sentence is important because some might be afraid that transnational networks will somehow diminish the importance of national cultures, but that doesn't seem to be the case, at least not seen from the Kuipers perspective and from our studies. Now, there have been a number of studies. I'm not going to go into these quotations, but Bilby and Harrington looked at this and talked about insider knowledge and construction of a market. It talked about Weissman in 2012 talked about buyers being more willing to take a risk if they know the market and can identify different things. And Steemers in 2004 talking about how UK acts in foreign markets, talks about decisions made on assumptions of what the audience want and what they have as their experience in networking with others. So underlining the importance of networks in many ways. Now, just a little jump to something else to talk about networks in a way that we also dealt with it. This is a pretty simple graph of crime series, which seem to be the most popular transnational genre in Europe, at least according to the data we have and to the audience studies we have made. And we have studied very different types of crime series. On the right hand, you have transnational narratives and creative co-productions that actually are transnational, even as genres, because they deal with more than one culture. The bridge is Sweden, Denmark. The others are, the team is the broadest, perhaps, but also the crossings is pretty good. And this is an indication of the fact that there's now they now make transnational narratives that seem to be more natural and not so much Euro-putting as we once talked about it. But we also have co-productions, co-financings with only national narratives. For instance, Wallander and The Killing. I mean, they are made in combination in the Scandinavian combination of several countries, but in a way, it's just a national story. And you also on the left has national series with transnational distribution. For instance, the Belgian Salamander. Midnight Murders, Broadchurch UK, and Happy Valley, Midsummer Murders, it shows one of the most popular series with audiences across Europe. And Broadchurch and Happy Valley are examples of very local crime series on a UK basis. So So when you work with networks, creative networks and genres, narratives, you see different ways of doing this. And I don't think it's necessarily better to do the transnational narratives than the national narratives with a financial co-production or the local, as long as it's distributed and actually works in a European context. Now, this I'm not going into, but this is just to show the network of the bridge, both the financing, the creative network between Swedes and Danes, and the way it has been distributed out in the world. And you can see this network we see with the bridge is actually a pretty stable network. It's a network of all the Scandinavian countries, plus Germany, plus in this case also Media EU. This is a way of networking which is seen very often with Scandinavian series. Now, the question of Europudding always comes up, and when we interviewed people around the bridge for our project, both the Swedish main writer and the Danish main writer, Nikolaj Scherfig, they touched upon this. And I think Nikolaj Scherfig's way of putting it is really interesting. What he said was, for me, co-productions are interesting if they can help develop authentic stories. It is very important to create co-productions that make stories possible that build on and use cultural and national differences. The fantastic thing about the bridge was that we did exactly that. It was a real, authentic, transnational story and reality we dealt with. There are cultural borders everywhere, and the way we relate to people at the other side of the border is based on some specific local national differences. But the way we relate is pretty universal, and people everywhere can read their own situation into it. And this, in a way, nails the distinction between universal, local, national, which we have dealt with in other contexts. And the good thing is that the universal dimension of almost any kind of genre is strong enough to go down well with other audiences than the audiences that it was first produced for. Now, of course, the Danes think the bridge is a Danish series, and the Swedes think it is a Swedish series. But that's how it goes. Okay, now I'm going to bore you with some statistics. I'm going to do it quickly, but first something about the demographics and structure of European television fiction in 13 countries that we worked with. The interesting thing here is, of course, how many hours of EU series that were broadcast in these different countries, and you can see that Great Britain is the absolute lousiest European in this context. I think this is, they have improved a bit since, but well, who knows what will happen when they Brexit, we'll see. But you can see that it's pretty different in each of the countries. So the average, which might be interesting to see, is how much is in total European, that is non-national, national or non-EUR, that means the rest of the world, mostly US. Well, you can see that the figures here are different from film figures, because in film figures the non-EUR would be above 60. So television apparently is better in integrating European stuff on the national channels. However, if we look more closely, you can see, of course, that the big one is Great Britain. The average origin of of fiction on other in other countries is 52, and Germany, France also pretty big. And so we still have, of course, big countries and small countries. Now, another interesting thing is how is commercial channels and public service channels contributing. And as you can see here, commercial is the blue, public service the red. There is quite a dominance of public service in terms of European hours of European television series broadcast. So in fact, it looks like this. So a big message to our politicians: don't mess with the public service channels, please. This is just a Danish figure, but it's too much to show other countries. But what is interesting here is that you can actually see an increase in European content in Denmark. There is a decrease from 2013 and 18, but overall in this period it's stabilized around 50, 54. So this could be seen in other countries. So there is in fact a development towards more European content, mainly of course on public service stations. Now, the other big data study we made was a study of the influence of co-production and networks in Europe, and the sample looks like this. We had 62 channels. It was a period from 2011 to 14. We had 2,348 distributions all in all. And of those, co-productions counted for 831, and single productions from 1,517. And these are the countries and channels involved. So it's a pretty large sum of data. And if you look at single country distribution, you get a very, very clear picture of what co-production means. Because single co-production, as shown in this, gives United Kingdom an extreme dominance in Europe. All other countries are falling behind here in exporting single productions. So if you look at this, you can see that the UK is the spider of European single production distribution. If we only had single production distributions, probably this would continue forever and ever. And as you may remember, United Kingdom do not participate very much in European co-productions. Some, but not that much. So, if you look at the difference between single productions and co-productions, you see that other countries come into the center, and in fact, you get a very different co-production pattern in which the Scandinavian countries and Germany become very strong and the United Kingdom weaker. So when you increase co-production between countries, you actually increase a network that can be more and more permanent and can expand and create alternative patterns in European television production. Now, we did a little reduction of this co-production. We took out 5, those that had only 5 productions for simplicity. And what you see is clearly that you have 2 centers in Europe that are really strong in co-production. It's the Scandinavian countries and it's Germany. Germany is more and more moving into the center of co-production in Europe. They are incredibly active for some reason. Now, I'm going to move to audiences, and I'm going to quote myself first. Very clever man. It's from the conclusion of the book. The catch-22 of European media culture is that the content is there in abundance, one could say, but all too often stays in the national space. This is one of the reasons Europeans know more about US and UK culture than about their other European neighbors. We talk about the role of television drama for building a national imagined community. European television drama has the same potential role to play for a European audience, seeing and discussing stories from different European countries on a regular basis could develop our sense of how other Europeans live and think. Meeting European others on the screen could change our concept of and relation to Europe. This is a hopeful conclusion based on the research we have made, so it's not just wishful thinking. We can actually document that this happens. So what did we do just once more? We had the audience data of popularity, ratings, share, demographics, lifestyle, comparing genres nationally and transnationally. We had surveys where we could link lifestyle, demographics and values to media preferences. We had focus groups where you can talk more closely with smaller groups about their media experience. And we had the wider reception from critics, blogs, social media, etc., etc. Now, what we came up with was what we call a cognitive sociological model of drama reception. Because when you talk to audiences that have had a particular experience, what you find is that there is some element of very subjective cultural encounters. I mean, they react to certain things because their personal experience and background is like that. For instance, a person in one of the focus groups was very taken by a British series because it also had a character that died of cancer. So it sort of resonates in a special way. But much stronger than that is what we could call collective social cultural screen encounters, which is reception based on the nationality or local or regional reality we live in, which of course influences the way we see also products from other countries. So we could either identify through that, for instance, seeing a British or a German crime series, a person might say, oh, I can see something in common. We also have that in Jutland in Denmark or wherever it might be. Or it could be a form of distanciation or reflection on the difference between being British or being Danish or German or whatever it is. And then, of course, there are those universal cognitive emotional screen encounters that are released no matter what we see. It doesn't matter really if it's a Belgian series or a German series or a Danish series. They are there because we identify with people through these emotional processes. Now, one example, we did a focus group on The Team, which is, as you may know, a co-production involving Germany, Belgium, Denmark, Switzerland, Austria, and Sweden, and has a multinational cast, multilingual, multinational. I mean, it takes place in different countries because it's about police working together. And what they do is they talk their own language when they are together with their own folks, and then they talk English when they are together across borders. Now, this is examples from what two Danish focus groups said, one with high education and one with low education. There was a clear difference between the two groups. The high educated group had a very distant, evaluative and reflective position to the series, whereas the lower educated were more immediate, more focused and on personal experience. And there was also a difference in the way they looked at it. The lower educated group had expected a more traditional DR drama and feels that this series is too complex. The reason they did see it as a DR drama was that it was broadcast in the slot where DR drama is normally placed, and it had a Danish director, etc., etc. The higher education was more hooked and reflects on the international-national relations. So, not surprisingly, social and cultural differences play out in the way people react to series. Now, the main themes that came up in the focus group did deal with globalization and nationality, language, stereotypes, genre and aesthetics, and Europe and the EU. For instance, like this, globalization and the national, they saw the series as realistic, international, and as a natural continuation of the Danish series, The Killing and Danish-Swedish, The Bridge, but they were also critical of the two dominant international aspects. The lower educated really tried to see it as a Danish series, but as they couldn't do that, they were a bit disappointed. There were clearly stereotypes working here, and stereotypes is not necessarily a negative thing because it's something we use to navigate in an unknown landscape when we see something. So, but they were there and they were discussed. The language was a problem, and the European identity was a problem for some. And some felt that if co-production and financing determines the story and the locations, we are in deep trouble. That was one of the critical points. Now, there were differences between, we identified in the survey people that never watched European series, those that were sporadic viewers, those that were moderate viewers, and those that were dedicated viewers. And if you look at their response to, for instance, the question of, do you agree that European film and television series could contribute to your experience and understanding of European culture and society and history, those that watched it often were the most positive, but actually also the non-viewers said that probably, yes, they thought this would probably turn out to be worthwhile from that perspective. Now, I'm going to show you one last. We had a quite some research done on Downton Abbey, because Downton Abbey, like it or not, is by now the most viewed television series in world history. So we felt that we had to look at that as an example of the very famous and widely distributed form of English heritage drama. And we looked at the reception, and I think it's a bit interesting, because what we did was that we took a sample of, a representative sample of newspapers in the two countries and coded their reaction according to these 5 elements: genre, aesthetics, narrative, media, business, social and political issues, stars, fandom, lifestyle, nationality, transnationality, Europe. And what turned out was that you see there's almost a reverse reaction in the two countries. So in the UK, they were extremely occupied with the media business and the genre, aesthetics and narrative, and the others came further down. And media business came out as a very strong element, and I'm going to show you a quote. We can't. British TV exports hits blah blah blah, sales boost in China and East Europe, sales to China rise 90% in China following the success of Downton Abbey, US up 11% but still the most lucrative market. It's kind of a play on UK as a global power through television. There's also a little social reaction from the press that normally criticizes the Sun, for instance, class differences and that kind of thing. So also that came up. But it's interesting to see that the way the two series were received and discussed in the two countries were quite different, almost opposite each other in the priority that was given to the different themes. Now I'm going to show you one little thing. Yeah, that was it. I think this is almost pathetic. Not bad for a small island that no one listens to. British, etc. You saw that before. Okay. Not too bad. Okay. Conclusion. If you have grand visions for a unified European culture and an integrated audiovisual space, and perhaps even a European public sphere, which has been discussed in numerous publications from the European Union and research groups that have been paid by the European Union. If you have that as your goal, our research results will probably be a bit of a disappointment, because it's nowhere to be seen, not in that shape and form, although European cultural integration takes place. So if you take a more pragmatic, practice-oriented position, there is plenty of room for cautious optimism in some areas. So our research clearly documents that a networked media culture of institutions, funds, professionals, creative people is on the rise, and that co-production and the cultural consequences of this is growing networks that European drama gets around and is on the rise. So something is happening, and it's happening because of people with feet on the ground, not because of grand visions. I mean, people on the ground may have grand visions as well, but it's a much different way of approaching, and one that we would sustain as the way to go forward. So also our research clearly demonstrates that a broader transnational television audience is in fact developing, and that some of the discussions in Europe about us and others and central social and cultural issues are actually being discussed when different audiences and publics meet on European screens. And even better, they actually do want to meet more European products on the screens. So if we can get it out there, it would probably have a much, much bigger effect. But the problem, of course, is that the fragmentation of the European audiovisual space or sphere lingers on, and the digital challenge is not just around the corner, it's actually already here. Now, if you look at the digital challenge, I'm not an expert. The experts were other people in the book. But to start with the obvious, digital technology is in principle borderless, transnational, and thus very perfect to develop and sustain transnational networks. They are easy to access, and they give the consumer or the audience individualized access to content wherever they are. So this is sort of the technology possibility. But when implemented in a fragmented and nationally divided media culture like a European, what happens is basically that fragmentation is repeated, also in the digital area. So if you look at most European countries, they have 10 to 15 different streaming services, probably more in bigger countries, that compete for the same audience. I'm going to show you a graph at the end for Denmark. And what this does is certainly not to create greater coherence. On the contrary, it fragments the audience even more. And this then tags into another change from flow television to streaming, where large-scale audiences are declining. They have already declined rather drastically, so that in Denmark, for instance, when you could expect more than 1 million for a primetime series, now it's under 1 million, more like between 500 and 1 million. There are very few examples in Europe of collaboration between competing national channels and producers of streaming platforms. In fact, I can only remember one that's recently been launched, that the UK, in the UK, ITV BBC Channel 4 will create a common streaming platform. So this might be happening in the future in other countries, but still it will be individual channels or perhaps collaboration between individual channels in a national context. That's what we see. We haven't seen anything so far that points in another direction. And of course, when the European Union launched the digital single market concept, the cry was high. So can they do anything, or where should the political forces come from to do this? Again, I think from networks, below and up. But is it going to happen? I'm not sure. Because in a way we already have a European platform. This European platform is Netflix, HBO, Amazon Prime. And it's hard to imagine that there could be an alternative transnational European service, public service of similar reach and power. And it won't help, I think, that those players, to a certain degree, are interested in stronger co-production and collaboration with national markets. This could be seen as a threat, but it could also be seen as a possibility. You never know. But I mean, there is, whereas the creative networks seem to be flowering in Europe, this is another kind of challenge which would need policy attention and collaboration of a completely different kind if it's going to work. So that's the big challenge. And that was the end. Look at this. It's in Danish, but what you see here is who is the biggest streaming service in Denmark. Netflix, 48%. DR, the big public service broadcaster, close by, 47%. YouTube, Viaplay, HBO Nordic, etc., etc. So the public service broadcasters are up there, and they're certainly working to increase and improve their streaming services. But there are a lot of very minor other kinds of players here that's, well, if you are critical against fragmentation, they sort of divide the market into very small franchises. You could also say it's diversity. I don't know. I don't think so. Okay, thank you for listening. I'm open for questions, critique, remarks, whatever.
So, hi. I wonder the difference between DR and Netflix in Denmark. It's a very, very small difference. I'm from Norway, and the difference is much bigger. The Peppercaster is #2, but Netflix is really, you know, I think for daily use, triple the size. And Norway is also on the top of household subscribing on SWOD. It's 61% at least of the household having SWOD. So why is the difference in Denmark so little, I wonder?
Habits, I would say. I mean, I don't know the Norwegian situation. We didn't deal with Norway in the maybe the Danish DR was earlier on the streaming. No. I have no real explanation. As I said, I'm not the expert. Policy. Quality. Yeah, might be. I wouldn't say that. No, Norway is really getting there. So, Norway is a new black.
No, but I don't. I just think that the situation in Norway is alarming, because when you have 61% of the households subscribing, it is very, very dominant. And we have also, for years, been clearing rights for our player. So we are actually much ahead of Denmark and a lot of other European countries.
But how far did you say that NRK was behind Netflix? Was it more than 20%, or what did you say?
It's more than 20%. I don't have
that's amazing, I would say.
So, even though our player was very, very early on, so I just will encourage everyone to collaborate. And,
well, the Scandi player. I mean, it's a Scandi player. Actually, I mean, we have a very strong collaboration between all the Scandinavian countries. So it would probably be a feasible idea to think about something that was common for all the Scandinavian countries. Who knows? Yeah, okay, but it's not yet there, but that's a way to go,
Hi, good morning. Hi. I'm French public broadcaster. You say you ended the study in 2016. Things are going so fast
I know.
today. Are you going on with the research? I mean, within the university or otherwise?
Yes. I mean, since 2016, especially the digital area is, of course, developing very fast. So, I mean, most of the other trends we discovered are still there, and they are more firmly based on things that cannot be changed from one day to another. But the digital is changing rather fast. So, of course, we need to look deeper into that. I'm an emeritus professor now, so I'm not going to do that. But there are some at the University of Copenhagen from the group that are working with the digital development. So, and the Belgians are still they're still working on their book publication on the digital development. So there will be newer research coming out.
I'm just curious. It sounds like it's either or DR or Netflix. Do you find places where people subscribe to both or subscribe to more than one, so it's not either or, but both?
Well, DR is free because we have a public service fee, so you can access it without paying, whereas you have to subscribe to Netflix. Oh, it's disappeared now. Television 2 in Denmark is also public service, but they have made a player you have to pay to access. So this shifts all the time, but of course it influences the use. I mean, you can go to DR any day. Maybe you're not using it for a long time, but you can go there freely. The others, many of the others, you have to pay. Viaplay, for instance, is also you also pay. So that's an important factor.
connection if they don't get access, if we don't get access to each other's stories and lives?
Well, if you look at what is happening right now in Europe, nationalism on the rise. Tomorrow maybe we put up fences against refugees because Merkel won't make it in Brussels at the meeting there. Brexit, if it happens. There are a lot of things that point to a very difficult political period in European history. And my feeling is, I don't think it's just a feeling, it's what we get out of the results we have. The more people know each other, the more they don't say, oh, those Polish idiots and those Hungarian bastards or those devilish Norwegians or whatever they say. I mean, actually narrative stories can change our perception of others. And I think that's extremely important. If Europe falls apart in nation states very strongly in the coming years, and we don't manage to work together like we already started doing, and also on the digital platforms, I mean, we will have a more divided Europe. That's what will happen.
And where can we find more facts about narrative having that effect?
Yes, there's a book up there. But there's actually also a good colleague of mine at the at the University of Copenhagen, Hans-Jørg Trentz. He wrote a book, came out last year, called Narrating Europe. We have used it in his research. It's really, really good. And he's a sociologist. I'm amazed a sociologist can write that kind of stuff, but he did. Hans-Jørg Trentz, T-R-E-N-Z. But we quote a lot of those sociologists working with what narratives and cultural encounters could do in the book. There are others. Well, the sun is waiting, or the coffee, or